you elicited. And usually it's narratives who are said to be the most ecologically valid data just because it's natural, spontaneous speech. But what do we do when we want to study something a little bit more conversational, like conversational phenomena, or something a little bit more pragmatically difficult? For example, pragmatically biased contexts such as incredulity questions or rhetorical questions, how we frame the experiment or how we approach it to elicit such type of data. And well, we're not the first ones to ask this question. This is a wonderful chapter by Mariia del Mar Van Rijn about the raw prosody research and how you can approach it. So on the one hand of the continuum, we have corpora, which is natural data. It's long recording, sometimes hours. And it's the good thing here is that it's absolutely ecological and natural. On the other end of this continuum, we have experiments which are designed in a way to elicit the data you want, but then they're less natural. So the good thing about corpora that it's natural, but we have low control of variables. For example, in all these hours of recordings, we might not find a single rhetorical question, for example, or maybe just a couple, but how comparable are they? In the experiments, it's less natural data, but at least we have a high control of variables. And somewhere in between here, we have all range of different approaches. For example, the discourse completion task, when the experimenter interfere, but does it with like in a minimalistic way, just trying to elicit what is needed to be elicited. So what we have tried so far with children, we list here 3 tasks that we applied. One is audiovisual prosodic test, APT, which we published in 2023. It was applied with more than 300 kids, and some of them typically developing and 55 of them non-typically developing. The ages are from 3 to 8, and that task was developed in Catalan. Actually, now we also applied it in Russian as well. And another task is multimodal imitation task. So here we don't an elicited imitation approach. And this multimodal imitation task was recently accepted, and this paper is in press now. And that's also almost 300 kids. We applied this task with similar ages, 3 to 7, also in Catalan. And there is the task by Becky, which she will explain in more detail in a second, which is also an elicited imitation task. If you want to quickly say what's going on with this task, yeah.
Yeah, so it's an elicited imitation task. We're looking at eliciting speech. So we were interested both in prosody and in morphosyntax. And we've currently done it in 2 formats so far. Stimuli that were presented live, so not recorded, with a robot puppet. That was with 31 typically developing kids aged 3 to 11 in English. And then we've also done some experiments with recorded stimuli, which we piloted with 9 kids so far, also in English. And we'll talk about I'll talk about the details in just a second.
Okay. So the audiovisual prosodic test, that's a classical discourse completion task, but adapted for children. So we have some nice pictures we present to children on the screen, as you can see in the picture, which are designed to elicit some speech from them. So they're free to utter any speech in response. For example, in the first one, you want to find out whether a friend goes to musical school, takes a music class as well. So at the end, the experimenter asks, how would you ask her, the girl? And the child can say something like, do you take music class? So it's elicited speech. Or another example for questions like you want to ask mom, what's in the bag? So what would you say to your mother? And the child might say something like, what's in the bag? Or let me see, or I'm curious what's inside. So because it's free speech, we can elicit different answers. And another task is multimodal imitation task, in which the child is presented with pre-recorded stimuli. You here see a picture of an actress performing. Well, actually, it was also to elicit a jest, but here we just focus on prosody. So the child is asked to repeat after the actress certain phrases. They're different. For example, shall we go to the playground to go down the slide? And what we found by applying this task is that it didn't work when we just asked kids to do it via screen. So if they just see the actress performing it on the screen and then they ask to repeat it, the children really didn't go for it, and they were really shy and they didn't engage. So what we had to do to add as an extra step is actually to ask the experimenter to perform the task first, so do the imitation, and then ask the child. So it's the screen, the experimenter, and then the child, and that really improved our task, because then the children were more prone to answer because they just saw an adult doing that. And something similar happened with the Becky's task.
Exactly. So yeah, if we move to the next slide, we started in a slightly different place. We did elicited imitation with a robot puppet. The aim here was actually to flatten out the prosody in what was provided to the children, in the hope that they would put their own prosody to the words, because it was set up that there was a robot puppet and a human puppet, and the human puppet couldn't understand the robot puppet, so the child was the interpreter. But most children up until the age of about 6 found it far more entertaining to imitate robot prosody. So we got some nice morphosyntactic data and not much in the way of prosody, which, as it turns out, is going to be quite useful to us. But the other problem here was that our robot puppet was manipulated live, and so the stimuli were not normalized. So we got some feedback at a conference, and they said, well, why don't you just do a straight up elicited imitation task? We thought, okay. But we wanted to normalize the stimuli. So recorded a research assistant speaking the stimuli in a very engaging, child-friendly way. And similar to Mariia and her team, the kids were not there for it. They weren't up for it at all. And those same children immediately, if we performed it live, would copy us. So what we experimented with was using actually a Zoom avatar, that's the cat in the middle of the screen, same research assistant, same voice, but with the cat face moving its mouth in time and sort of moving its head, the children were willing to imitate the cat on the screen. So we could actually normalize the stimuli, or at least keep them constant across between participants, sorry. And you can just see in the screenshot one of our children, because the cat was set up as a teacher of English for the alien puppet, but the alien was shy. So the cat would produce the speech, and then the child had to imitate it because the alien liked the child and was going to perform for the child. So we managed to bridge the gap of the recorded live problem. But we should note, for any sort of truly multimodal studies where you would also want gesture, certainly the Zoom avatar is not ideal. It'll move its eyebrows. It can sort of shake its head, turn its head, tilt its head, but then that's about it. And the mouth movement is pretty rough, to be honest. It also wiggles its ears, which I don't naturally do. But we don't get any manual gesture, and also you don't get any, it doesn't pick up any information in terms of distance from the screen. So if you were to lean forward while using the avatar, the cat would stay still. Yeah, so if we can move on to the next slide, please. So what worked well about this range of approaches is that we were able, with both types of approaches, to elicit speech across quite a wide range of ages. So the imitation task can be used with young children, maybe even younger than the 3-year-olds that we both worked with, depending on the complexity of the stimuli. And the nice thing about the APT is that it can also be used with quite young children, but also older children, because it's semi-spontaneous speech where they can produce whatever they like. Older children, Mariia was telling me earlier, basically just produce longer, potentially richer data, as opposed to an elicited imitation task where at some point they reach ceiling relatively early. This also, all of these approaches do produce comparable data across children, unlike corpora, and they control for many aspects of the context of the elicited imitation to a greater extent than the APT. but in imitation, you can control for the syntax, sonority, segmental phenomena. The APT you can control for pragmatics and so on. And just to sort of re-emphasize, the recorded stimuli did work just as well as the live stimuli in the elicited imitation task, as long as the recording wasn't a video of a human. But I've already noted the limitations here for gesture. These are relatively quick tasks to do. They don't take too long, so the child isn't under too much pressure in that sense. And as I've sort of just mentioned, the APT gives you semi-spontaneous data. Not spontaneous data, reviewers pick you up for calling it spontaneous, but semi-spontaneous data, at least non-scripted. Next slide, please. But of course, they don't always work. So shyer, quieter children may not engage in the task to the same extent that we might as others, or that we might like. Similarly, either through shyness or other personality traits, sometimes the speech is more monotonous or sort of muted in its prosody. As we found out, robots will give you robot speech, especially with younger children. So it's just too strong to resist. And another issue with the APT task was that some children would sort of think as they were speaking, and then might actually verbalize this by saying things like, in response to a prompt, like, what would you say to your mother if you saw her with a big bag? They might say things like, I would say that, and then fill in the blanks. So obviously that's not comparable. That's not the aim, and it's not comparable with, if you like, a root presentation. And in that way, sometimes some children also don't necessarily enact and act in the role to the extent that you would hope. And in terms of, so this is something that has also been criticised by reviewers, that the APT does present role play. So to what extent is that? It's not spontaneous speech, it's semi-spontaneous. How representative is it? An issue with elicited imitation tasks is that, particularly if you are needing to perform them live, the data may not be quite comparable if several different people are administering the task. And of course, you can also get variation within an individual too. And the question, it does always come back to how representative is this of natural speech? It's still, the question can still be raised as to whether or not the patterns that you can elicit would actually be used in a real life context. So our questions for the discussion portion, which is essentially the next sort of 20-25 minutes, for you to think about and join in with, is, have you also faced this methodological problem and come up with a way to overcome some of the issues that we've had? Or do you have questions about how we've tried to overcome these problems? Have you faced similar challenges in other populations, such as older children, adults, elderly people? Particularly to those of you who work in gesture studies, have you found similar challenges as well? How do you elicit gesture in whichever groups you work with? And a slightly thornier problem maybe, or a slightly different problem, when it comes to elicited imitation in particular, are they still valid when you're looking at interface phenomena? So elicited imitation for syntax and morphosyntax has typically been used for phenomena where you're only changing one variable at a time, right? So it might be a lexical variable or a morphosyntactic one. But when you're looking at interface phenomena, say syntax prosody, and then prosody is changing at the same time as something morphosyntactic, how solid a test is this now of the variables that you're actually interested in? That's something that we're wrestling with a little bit, looking at biased questions, which are necessarily different both in their morphosyntax and in their prosody, at least in some cases. So to open up the discussion, we do have a poll prepared to see which of those 4 starting points people might be more interested in or might have something to contribute to. So if you'd like to express your interest on the poll, if you have it, that'd be great. Just leave it open for about another 30 seconds, I think. So it'll be open for a minute in total.
End the poll.
We've got 10 seconds. Okay, we end the poll now and share the results. Most respondents are interested in thinking about the methodological problem. So if we start there, and then we can move on to the issue of validity with respect to interface phenomena. And I'm very sure that gesture is going to arise at some point during the discussion too. So would anybody like to kick us off, particularly in thinking about overcoming the methodological issues?